A big part of our economy is moving commodities or products from the producer to the consumer. And the more you can move at once, the more economical it becomes, whether it is by ship or rail or by tractor trailer over the road. Now, tractor trailers can be in singles, doubles, or triples, and the more you can move, the less expensive it becomes. And it was the same in the Mojave Desert in the 1800s. This is what is referred to as the horn and bumper. It sits on the back axle of the wagons and helps steer and stop the wagon that's following. It's made out of 3/4 inch thick, 3.5 inch wide steel. The first part is to prepare the ends of the iron for forge welding, so we bring them up to not quite a welding heat, and here's where we will actually use borax. This is what will prevent the oxidation when we put these pieces of iron back into the forge to actually bring them up to a welding heat. We're going to do these to both sides, scrape them off, and coat them with borax. Even though I'm wearing welding gloves here, this steel is up to a couple thousand degrees, and it's awful hot on the hands. So I'm going to take a couple of clamps. We're going to position these so that they're parallel right on top of each other, and then put them back into the forge, and we'll go ahead and bring them up to a welding heat. Now, a welding heat is about 2350, 2400 degrees. So once these are up to a welding heat, the first weld is actually going to be kind of the tack weld. Just to make sure the two are adhered together. I'm going to scrape off the edges where the joint is and add some more borax for a flux. Do this to both sides. And then we're going to go back into the forge and bring it back up again to a welding heat. This weld we really don't want to be lengthened, but we would like the iron to be wider. So we're going to turn sideways here and actually draw this iron as it's being welded to a wider width. The steel is 3.5 inch wide. By the time we get done, it will be 3 3/4, almost 4 inches wide. So we're going to scrape the side one more time, add a little more flux to the joint, and go ahead and make the third final weld. Oftentimes forge welds are done in sets of 3. Again, we'll look for width more than we look for length on this lower bumper weld. So this third time through pretty much finishes the weld, and we're going to bend this 3/4 by 3.5 iron to a 90 degrees angle to the weld itself. Now, even though we have a good heat on the iron, it will bend just right at the weld, which is going to be about 1 inch above the jaws of the vise. Kind of get them started a little bit here. I'm going to go ahead and use the rosebud torch so I can actually keep applying more heat right at the spot above the weld where it needs to bend. It's a pretty good piece of iron to bend at a 90 degrees. So it has to be pretty hot right at the spot where it bends. And we'll have to go through a couple steps to actually start to tighten up that bend a little bit. And this is where it's a good test on whether you have a good weld or not. There, but you can see we're going to force this joint together. Now to get this a little tighter, we're going to stick this back into the forge again, and this time with the bumper sticking directly up. Here you can see it sticking up out of the coal. We're putting the heat right on the bend. And we're going to take and upset this iron again right in the bend and kind of tighten up that bend. We're going to upset it two different directions. We'll do it once lengthwise, and then we'll bring it back on the anvil and do it right on the end of the bumper. And here again, we're just upsetting, bringing that joint together at that 90-degree bend. Now here's where we're going to drive this bumper down into the anvil and tighten up the bend. At the same time, we're going to try to make sure that it's straight at 90 degrees. Make sure we're flat. And this is what the lower joint where the bumper is, what that forge weld looks like. The top piece of the bumper is a long piece, and the end of these pieces have a taper to them. So before we forge these together, we're going to take the top part of this horn and bring the end down to a taper. And this tapered end is what actually will be forge welded together. We actually do it to the bottom part of the horn and bumper, the piece of iron that has the bumper to it. I don't show it on this video, but we do the same thing on the end. So there's both ends have a taper to them before they're welded together. This tapers from the 3.5 down to, I think it's under 3 inches. Here we'll take the time to take some of the trip hammer marks off the edge, clean up the hammer marks, clean up the scaling. And then as the last step here, we'll put it back in the trip hammer. We'll take the flatter, and you can see we use it there to take out the trip hammer marks and make sure we have a flat surface when we go back to forge weld these together. So we'll let this cool, kind of set it off to the side, and when it's cool, we're actually going to do some shaping to it before we forge weld it together also. Now we pattern out the shape that we want on a piece of plywood, how it wants to be finished, and we put these in the press and we bend them to make them fit the correct rise when they are attached to the reach, and this is the position they'll be in when they're actually forge welded together. So right now we're going to prepare the horn weld just the same way we did the bumper weld. We're going to clean off the scaling. We're going to apply the borax for the flux. We want to make sure it's got a good coating on it. When you put the borax on, it just kind of melts right to the steel. Make sure it gets protected from the air. This is just one of the uses of the product borax that was hauled on these wagons, was for flux in forge welding. We have our bolts, holes drilled. We're going to put this block of wood in that's the same size as the reach, and go ahead and position both of these top and bottom pieces of iron that's going to forge together on the tips. This is what's going to form the horn with the bumper. Now, like we put clamps when we did the bumper, we're also going to clamp this together. We'll adjust the tips to make sure they're in the proper position, make sure they're lined up. Is when we want these just right when we actually do the forge weld. So we'll put good tension on these clamps and go ahead and stick this back into the forge and bring it up to a welding heat. Now this piece of iron, as it is here, adds up to about 80 pounds. So Calvin is being on the back end of this. He's actually the one that helps roll and control this as we put it in. And the hammer, and this is the initial tack weld. Kind of a gentle weld again. Because of the size and bulk of it, I just did it on one side. I'm going to go ahead and clean the edges, reflux the joint. We'll do this on both sides. Make sure this is a good sealed up joint. Stick it back in the forge, bring it back up to heat, and then we'll actually do the second weld of the pattern of 3 welds. So this will be the second time to the hammer, and we'll actually get into rotating this and do, this is the full strength weld. A little more aggressive blows with the hammer. This is what actually is bringing the 2 pieces into 1 piece. We just did a little bit of alignment before we go back into the forge. This time we'll actually do a little bit more. But this will be the final and the third weld on this horn. Now is when we'll pay a little more attention to our joints. We'll do a little bit more tapering to it. The 2 pieces are now one, and they can actually move together as one. This is more of a dressing up heat, kind of pointing out some of the spots that we need to work on, to draw out. This is more shaping. You notice we didn't put any flux on this time, we just put it back, brought it back up into heat. We're doing our shaping, the final kind of touches, as much as can be done in the drip hammer. We'll bring it back up into heat, and not really quite as hot a heat, but again, we'll take it to the anvil and do a little more finish work with the hammer. Work out some of the trip hammer marks. Kind of clean up our edges. But you can see the taper to the horn. And how the 2 are now 1 piece. We'll let this cool down a little bit, and then Calvin is going to take the grinder and we'll do a little touch up, a little finishing on the edges. Some of the edges have round corners to them. This is the second horn and bumper that's already been done. This is what they look like when they're finished, and this is where it goes on the back of the back axle. Well, in the process of getting ready to build the rear axle, I needed this horn and bumper to attach these triples, 2 wagons and a water wagon, together. And part of the reason of reposting these videos is that it is a 10th year anniversary, and I have put together a jacket that is commemorating this 10th anniversary of the Borax Wagon legacy. But it is also to upgrade 720 quality video into 1080. So there's kind of multi-purposes behind it. Plus I'm cleaning up some of the editing and taking out some of the long pauses. So the next part is actually building the rear axles and doing this all in one video. The first step in building the rear axle assembly was to iron the end of the reach where it attaches to the front axle, and also where the reach hounds, which are on both sides of the reach, attach to the reach itself. Now the top and bottom plates on this reach are 1/2 inch thick by 5 inches wide, and the side irons are 1/2 inch thick by 4 inches wide. These have to be fitted to match the curves and the angles of both the reach and the reach hound joints. The reach itself is 4 inches thick, but it tapers to 2 inches at the end and where it also attaches to the front axle. So where this is tapered, we take this 1/2 by 5 iron and shape it to the curve of the reach, and then we heated it up to kind of hot set it onto the reach. This burns off the high spots and allows us to file off that, and it gets a good honest fit when we get ready to bolt these two together. Now this is the complete set of irons, the top and bottom plate, the side irons, and also the end cap that goes around the end of the reach. This is 1/2 inch thick by 2 inches wide, and it gives strength to the kingpin that will go through this end. We haven't drilled it through the wood yet, but we will when all the iron is assembled. This is bolted to reinforce the stress that is on that reach end, both in front and the rear of where the kingpin will be. Now these irons for the side are shaped for the curve of the reach, and they're also shaped where the reach hounds need to come and attach to the reach itself. So we're going to pin these in place in the front of the reach, but we're actually going to start to assemble them at the back of the reach. So we're going to clamp these irons in place with them pinned, and then we're going to shove the reach back, and by doing so we're bringing the reach hounds into the iron where they need to be finally assembled. So we can clamp these in place, and then we'll take and start the assembly from the back by drilling the back holes. Then we'll take it apart and actually attach these side irons to the reach hounds first and then work forward. Once they're in place, we can go ahead and assemble the front of these side irons to the reach, and all these take 1/2 inch bolts throughout. Now we can put the top and bottom plate, and you can see where the kingpin hole will be. And we're going to line all these up, make sure they're in the right position. We'll go ahead and clamp and drill and bolt these, and when they are all bolted in position, then we'll actually take and drill the 1.5 inch hole for the kingpin. We have the 1.5 inch hole drilled in the metal, and that is already in the correct position, so that becomes our kind of a guide or pilot when we do put the kingpin hole in. So this is just drilling and assembling the 1/2 inch bolts that are necessary to hold the top and bottom plate. Now while the majority of this assembly takes 1/2 inch bolts, there are some 3/4 inch bolts that go through both reach hounds and the reach. So here we're going to put these through, and they have nuts on both sides, and this will keep the reach hounds in their proper place. And then there's a 1/4 inch plate that goes on top with 1/2 inch bolts. So this completes the assembly of the front half of the rear axle. Now when we put the axle on the back side of the reach and the reach hounds, there are irons that we have machined saddles into that will actually have the axle sit on. The horn and bumper will go on the back of the reach, And then we have axle clips that will clamp over the axle cap and keep everything in place. So Calvin here is adjusting the saddles on the reach hounds. And when he does so, we're going to take and triangulate the axle to make sure that it is square and runs properly when it is in use. The horn and bumper goes in the center on the reach, and these axle clips are assembled over the axle cap, through each reach hound, through the reach and the horn and bumper, and then everything is bolted securely with 7/8 bolts. So here we have the back side of the rear axle assembly. And while we have this axle cap on, now is a good time when we took and made sure all the hubs are going to clear the axle cap. The last thing to do is to assemble the brakes. There's 3 sets of irons. This iron goes over the center, over the reach, which is a type of a mortise and tenon that is shown here on an old one. And then on the left side, this is an iron that's an inch thick, 3 inches wide, and it has a little saddle in it. And this holds the bar that's 2 3/4 inch thick and holds it in place. So this is where we took the 1x3 iron, heated it up in the forge. We made a little form to go into the press, and this is made of the 2 3/4 inch size bar that the brake handle itself is made of, and we're going to press this in to make the saddle that will receive the brake handle. So this was the first step, but we actually needed to go back and do it again because this was a gradual bend. So now we're going to put it back in. We'll put the top piece in place, put the pressure of the press in place, and then Calvin has a sledgehammer and I have a sledgehammer, and then we simultaneously hit from both ends and upset this. See it moving into the round piece that will actually be the brake rod itself. So this is just upsetting it back on itself so it has a tight fit onto the brake bar. Now we needed to make the brake handle itself. And this was made out of 1.5 inch thick by 3 inch wide steel. Now where the brake handle attaches to the 2 3/4 inch brake bar, this needed to be tapered down to 1 inch thick on the end. And so working in the forge, we can only heat about 6 or 8 inches at a time. So this is piece by piece by piece, tapering it out until we finally have our brake handle. Now the bar, which actually activates the brake beam itself, is welded onto a 2 3/4 inch. We have it turned so that it will receive into the brake handle, then we stick it in the forge and weld it into place. And this is just the last final steps where we are cleaning it up and kind of stress relieving it also. So when this is all done, we have our complete brake iron assembly. One on the right actually is a brace for the axle cap itself. The one on the left is the one with the saddle. And it goes through the axle cap. And the one in the middle that had the mortise and tenon type joint is in the center over the reach. Also goes through the axle cap and will be bolted to the reach. And then on the right side, there is just a 1 inch square bar that is also through the reach and bolted to the reach hound on the right side. These all have 7/8 rods drawn out on the ends, which are threaded, and we made 7/8 nuts for these, which we tightened into place. The brake handle itself ended up being 110 pounds, and it sets in the saddle through the hole in the center iron with a top cap to keep it in place, and this is how the brake handle works itself. So once this is all in place, we can take our 1/2 inch bolts and bolt them to the reach hounds and to the reach, and this secures all the brake bar irons where they need to be. So this completes the rear axle assembly. Here we have the front irons. Also show the back irons with the axle clips, all the brake handle irons, which hold the brake but also stabilize the rear axle cap. And of course, we do both of them the same. So to pull these three wagons as triples across the Mojave Desert, you can see it takes some pretty massive ironwork, because each of the first two wagons can carry up to 11 ton, and then the third wagon, which is a water wagon, is carrying 1,200 gallons. So this is how triples were pulled in the Mojave Desert. Now back to the issue of this coat, we're going to offer this as a commemorative light jacket with this emblem on it of the Borax legacy, a 10-year anniversary. What I would like to do is put it out and say how many are interested. I haven't ordered a bunch of them yet. I want to kind of get a feel if you're interested. If you are, send us an email at dave@engelscoachshop.com and we'll kind of get a feel for it. It's going to take about 2 weeks, possibly 3, when we actually decide how many we need, get them ordered, and have them available, and we'll let you know when that is. Also, these videos, when I am completed, is going to be available as a complete set if you want them in your library, and they'll now be up into 1080 quality. So once again, appreciate you following along on the progress of this 10th year anniversary revisiting the Borax Wagons. Thanks for watching.